Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville, in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts, in the shadow of the Great Blue Hills. We are so grateful that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Adam Sidwell. He is here to celebrate Evertaster. Before we begin our celebration of Evertaster, I am celebrating here in Boston because it's time to get back on the road. Yes, indeed. Our so long pandemic lockdown is opening up. Live events are happening, and the Reading with Your Kids podcast will be out there in the community, bringing some great books and some great magic and great fun to special events all over the country. We have two great live events coming that we would love to see you at. On August 28th, we will be at Connect Fest, a great family music festival happening at the Cape Cod Fairgrounds in Falmouth, Massachusetts. This is a wonderful event that we've been part of for many, many years. It's so much fun. Our buddy Phil Joel, the author of Redwoods in Wales and former member of the Newsboys, will be there with his band on the main stage. We'll be at the speaker stage presenting our magic show. We'll also be at our Reading with Your Kids booth. Be sure to come on over. It's a free event, but you do need tickets. They do have limited capacity. You can get tickets at fuseconcerts.org. And on September 18th, join us in beautiful Lowell, Massachusetts for the Lowell Kinetic Sculpture Race. I'm so excited. This will be the first time we're at this great event, and I have to tell you, I am like wicked excited about it. There are going to be all sorts of fantastic homemade sculptures that are human powered that are going to be racing on the land, on the river, in mud, on sand. It's going to be wild. We'll be there at the start and finish line in our Reading with Your Tent booth. Be sure to come on over, check out our magic show, and be part of the podcast. You can learn more about these events and everything else that's happening in the Reading with Your Kids podcast by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Joining us right now from the state of Utah, my guest today is here to talk about a fantastic middle grade series called Evertaster. Please welcome to the show, Adam Sidwell. Adam, welcome to the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Oh, very happy to be on here, Jed. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you having me on the show.
You're very, very welcome. I'm loving the cover art of the Evertaster series. It is fantastic, and I know if my son was still in the middle grade age group, this would be something that he would want to put on his bookshelf.
Oh, great. Well, I'm glad to hear that. You know, for me, cover art's such a big part of a book, and I, being an artist and an animator myself, I'm always very, very selective about what's going to go on the cover, and I hope that it expresses a bit of the story. And, you know, I've actually had so many readers tell me, oh, you know, I just saw it in Costco lying on the shelf, and I was so intrigued that I had to pick it up.
Yeah. Hey, you know, while we're here, we're definitely going to get into what Evertaster is all about. But before we do, since you have this expertise in art and have such a passion for cover art, we have a lot of illustrators and authors listening to the show, a lot of aspiring illustrators listening. What's the one kind of piece of advice? As somebody is putting together cover art, selecting cover art, what's the kind of one thing that they should look to make sure that cover art has? Should they be telling the whole story of the book, or do you just want to grab the potential reader by the collars and say, pick me up and buy me?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's a really good question. So let me tell you a little anecdote. I was working at a studio as an animator, and in fact, we were working on the movie Pacific Rim, and I'm surrounded by a lot of designers and artists, and they knew that I was my book was coming out soon, and they'd seen some of the art that was coming, and I'd shown them some of the mock-ups, and Goro Fujita, by the way, he's the artist. He's fantastic. He does a lot of very cool things in concept design. He's worked for DreamWorks, a number of other places, making really cool art for movies that you all recognize. And Goro, put together this comp and this image, and I looked at it and I thought, oh, this is really cool. And I was kind of going through some of the options, and one of the heads of the company, the studio that I was at, he said, "You know what? That's interesting." And he said something, and he was a design guy, and he had a real eye, and he said, "You've got to make sure that you're following the 10-foot rule." And I said, "The 10-foot rule? Wait, what's that?" And so he stood back 10 feet with the cover, and he showed it to me, and he said, "Does that grab your eye?" And I looked at that, and I said, "Yes, okay, I get it." Basically, what happens is, when you're an artist, you just are so excited to cram all the great things on your cover. And when you're a writer, you want to tell that whole story on your cover, but you shouldn't. You've got to resist that urge, because actually what's most important is the way that someone is going to see that book cover from 10 to 15 feet away on the shelf in the bookstore. And that translates also to Amazon thumbnails. If you're looking online and you're browsing and you see these little thumbnails, you want to see something that's going to catch your eye. So a good principle is to look at YouTube channels and YouTube videos. You'll see that a lot of those creators have that dialed in. Now, I wouldn't follow all the artistic principles exactly, because some of those things just work for YouTube. But they're designed to be eye-catching, to make you click. So imagine when you're looking at that book cover, you want information that somebody can take in quickly. If you're putting in 3 to 5 characters, it's probably too much, unless you have one really main focused character that people's eye gets grabbed onto. So that was one of the things that we looked at when we were creating Dan Allen's cover for Pizza Boy, actually, which I really love how that turns out. The artist on that one he's fantastic. He just does, such great work, and he's got an eye for composition. And so we really worked through that cover as well. And so same thing with Evertaster is we just wanted to tell a quick story, show some intrigue, show some mystery, give you a kind of a hook for what this story was about, so people would pick it up. And you know what? That's the same with your first chapter when you're writing. Your first sentence should make people say, "What's this about? I want to read the next sentence and the next one and the next one."
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at book 1 of Evertaster, the cover art, and it is fantastic. There's an 8 or a 9-year-old child holding an old-fashioned egg beater, and there's this giant gorilla looming over his or her head.
That's right. So the gorilla's looming over Guster Johnsonville, his head. He's 11 years old, and he's got an egg beater. And as you read the story, you'll discover that Guster has found, it's kind of a treasure map, inscribed on the handle of an egg beater, but it's all locked up and scrambled, and he has to decode it. And as he does so, he finds clues that lead him across the world to gather in search of the most delicious thing ever created. And, think of it, I always thought of it like, okay, this is Indiana Jones meets Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
I love that. And I'm just intrigued. What in the world could be the most tastiest thing in the world?
Well, I think it's ice cream, but I'm not going to tell you how this book ends. That would be telling you who done it. But I will tell you that along the way, what Guster finds is, he's the world's most picky eater, right? He just doesn't want to eat anything that his mom has ever made for him. And there's this dynamic between the two. It's really about that relationship between them. And she feels inadequate as a cook and as a mom as she's trying to feed this kid because he just doesn't like anything she's making. And, I wanted to write a middle grade series where there was actually a parent involved. And that is, it's almost breaking the rules in middle grade because you want your kids to grow up in a dangerous situation, in these stories where they're out on their own, they get away from their parents. And I understand that, right? And I've written other middle grade series that are that way. But in this one, I wanted something different. And that was that dynamic between, Mabel, who's Guster's mom, and his brothers and sisters and Guster, as they travel across the world. And, dad is out selling insurance and he's on a business trip and he didn't pick up his cell phone and, they're gone. And boy, is he get an earful when, they get back about their adventures. And, it's fun because I see these family dynamics and I think of my own family and my mom and, and I see this now in my kids, that there's a lot of story there, that develops as Guster, figures out, what am I going to do? Am I going to appreciate my mom or is she just, an old crazy who is never going to understand me?
Yeah. It's interesting. I kind of get business wise, maybe the books that, have the kids on their own solving these mysteries. Maybe they sell better or maybe someone thinks they're going to sell better. But one of the common things that comes up in talking to authors here on the show is, that middle grade age is so hard because kids are working through relationships and they're always trying to figure out relationships. And the most important relationship a kid's going to have to figure out is a relationship between themselves and their parents.
Oh, 100%. I think that's really actually a great insight because you have a lot of books focusing on, middle grade friendships. And that's usually a focus is like figuring out where you belong at school or at summer camp. And, with this one, I've had so many parents react to this and moms who just love this story because they, have been so excited that there was a book for them. They feel included in this story and they feel, like they can relate. And I get messages, oh, my kid's an Evertaster and we read through this and we had this exact problem at our house. And I think if anything, it's probably helped my sales. Evertaster was an Amazon top 100 bestseller. It's gone and, sold in, across the world. I've been on book tours in 12 different states and, to hundreds of schools talking about the story and people have just really enjoyed it and delved into the story and, it's made it a hit.
That's fantastic. I know one of the things when my kids were younger and growing up, I had a real problem with them just watching, a lot of the cartoons that they were watching. The dad and the mom were always morons.
Yeah.
And I just, at one point I go, look, dude, I'm just not having it. You gotta watch something where adults have something to contribute. I know we're not perfect, but, you kind of got to depend on us in a lot of ways.
It's a common trope in TV, right? And even in adult, programs, you have this strange trope of the wise child, where mom and dad are messed up and they just can't figure it out. And then the 8-year-old comes in and has just the exact right thing to say. And for anybody who's, raised 8-year-olds, they know that kids really need direction and they need to be told how to live, because they just don't get it. They'll forget to brush their teeth or eat their food if you don't interfere and help them out. They won't learn a work ethic. They won't learn how to share if they're just left to their own devices. And that's something that I think I'm really grateful to my mom for. And I know that it's funny because that trope, you just don't. It's just not very realistic.
Right.
Occasionally you get something where your kid does something really sweet and cool. And I just love my kids. They're wonderful. And they'll do one thing that reminds me to be better. But the idea that they walk in and they're Play-Doh and they drop some witticism that or platitude that changes everything, It's just not very realistic.
It's not realistic. And I know one of the things that I observed, especially with my son, was, that all of his buddies, they worked really hard to pretend they knew everything because they were afraid that everybody had it all figured out except for them. And that they had to put on this front because I can't let anybody find out that I don't know it all because they know it all. I actually had an experience once where I was listening to my son and his buddies just kind of try to pull the wool over each other's eyes. And I just kind of stopped them and goes, dudes, none of you know anything. Will you just chill out and relax? Just, you don't have to pretend so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's part of growing up and becoming an adult, right? Is you realize you don't know everything, but you can be okay with that because you're comfortable with what you do know.
Yeah.
And if you are also comfortable with, seeking to learn more and add to your knowledge, then, it helps you to understand that you don't have to know everything. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, I'm curious, what kind of reaction are you getting? Because I'm sure a lot of kids are looking at that Evertaster #1 cover that we talked about, and I'm sure a lot of kids are looking at it and saying, what's that weird thing the kid's holding in his hand?
That's right. That's actually pretty funny because, an ancient egg beater, is, well, it's ancient. It feels like it's something you see in an antique store. And when we first put it on there, the book's about 9 years old. I think they were even more prevalent. But even in the last 9 years, technology advances forward and those things fall away and get lost and get shuffled to the back rooms of the antique stores. And they don't know what they are. And so a lot of times we'll explain that to kids and they find it very interesting. And it kind of draws them in. And occasionally I'll show up to a book signing and somebody's actually cosplaying our characters, my characters in the book, and they have an egg beater like that. And I go, oh, that's so cool. And I always take a picture of that. So
that is cool. I mean, I remember being young and being amazed at my grandmother's egg beater. And you could just, because it's a really complex little machine that you run with your hand and get these wheels and gizmos. And it was, in my young mind, I just found it fascinating.
Well, yeah. And it's actually, it makes an intriguing part of the story because, this thing is supposed to be, hundreds of years old. And, it's an artifact from a bygone era that somebody crafted. And it makes it, it feels a little bit like Indiana Jones where he's going through these ancient, or old items and discovering their history and what was connected to them. And, it's such a historical romp. There's a lot of references that are made to, things in the past. And, those are, it's layered in history in a context for this, great chef that once lived long ago and traveled the world searching for the most delicious ingredients. And Guster and the Johnsonvilles are following in his footsteps. And they're on this exotic, dangerous tour, and they get to learn a little bit of history as they go along the way. And it's not, it's not Magic Treehouse, but it's the kind of thing where, kids have always enjoyed, oh, I read about that place. That's cool. And they said, oh, they find out later, oh, that was a real place. And I found it, I read about it in history and so, that's always a fun thing to find out, when kids are able to connect the dots and see that these places are real.
Yeah. I love that too. I mean, even reading, adult books, I remember reading this one, I think it was Mario Puzo book was writing about this, corrupt Pope in the Catholic Church. And I thought, wow, this is so fantastic. What a great story. Really pulled me in here. But wow, there's a lot of details. And did some research and found out that it was pretty much all based on reality. And I was horrified.
Yeah. Well, historical fiction in some ways is it's so intriguing because, we already have these stories that have played out in the past and they've shaped our world and they've shaped people's lives and civilizations and the stories real stories are already there, and it's fun to mine them and find out how we can use them as settings or influence some of what you're writing about as an author.
Yeah. Now, you are also the CEO of Future House Publishing. And in addition to the Evertaster series, you folks are also publishing the Super Dungeon series. And I know you wrote one of those books, and our buddy Dan Allen wrote one of the books. Tell us a little bit about that series, please.
Oh, I'm glad you asked. Okay, Super Dungeon is exciting and fun. And in fact, it's been the kids have been very interested in that one lately as I've been out signing books and autographing and talking to kids. Super Dungeon is based on a board game series that was put out by Ninja Division and Soda Pop Miniatures, and it's so fun. We've got a couple of copies of the game at my house, and they have these really awesome miniatures. The art is just so fantastic, and it's in the land of Crystallia, and Crystallia has been created by the people at Soda Pop Miniatures, and they put so much lore into it. And I approached them some time ago, and I said, this was years ago, and I said, hey, I love your game, and I love the art, I love the aesthetic. I think there's so much there. Could we write a book series there? And we proceeded to talk, and we got license agreements to do so. And then we wrote a 5-book series. There were 6 authors involved. Myself and Zach James wrote the first book in the series, and then Dan Allen wrote some other ones. D.W. Vogel, Christopher Keene, David West. See, did I cover 5 of them right there? Yeah. And so the series is pretty awesome. And in fact, we're continuing with the series. It was so well received. So we're going to be doing another one in the Castletown area. But basically, what the lore of the series, and this is what's really fun, is there's a prophecy of 5 princesses. When they have 5 princesses unite, they will bring peace back to the kingdom and expel the Dark Consul, who is the big bad in the story. And but the problem is, at the very first book, at the very start, one of the princesses goes missing. And so the sisters, as loyal as they are, all go out in search of their sister across the land in different areas. And so this is the story of Blaze, who has been commissioned by the king, who summoned her. First book is The King Summons. He summoned her to seek out Princess Sapphire, who happens to be a hero of hers, and find out what happened to her. And this is so fun, because it's not a typical damsel in distress story, but it's more of we find out Sapphire's been up to a lot, and it's really intriguing because Blaze goes to the Frostbite Reach. She has the power of fire, and this is the last place she wants to go, is to a frozen tundra, a frozen mountainside, where she's going to find ice giants, where she's going to find orcs, where she's going to find various other magical kobolds and creatures that she has to battle. And she has to decide if she's going to be brave enough to give up her super independent streak and join forces with those who are going to help her. And Super Dungeon is, the world has been fascinating. I've absolutely enjoyed writing in it.
That's really great. You mentioned, right before we go, earlier that you've had kids come up to you in cosplay carrying the egg beater. What's that like when you create characters, when you create a series that is so inspiring to kids that they decide that they're going to go out and become that character?
Well, it's very, very gratifying, because you know that what you've created has resonated with them so much that it feels real. And I always seek to make my characters have motivations that people can relate to. They have problems and development that others will find interesting, and that will make them seem real. Mm-hmm. I was always a Dostoevsky fan, right? Crime and Punishment, Brothers Karamazov. I just thought, oh, this is amazing. This writer is great. And, thought if I can learn just a little bit from him about developing characters, because that seems like it's the hardest thing to do. And so I would always set out to try to develop my characters in such a way that makes them feel fleshed out and real. Mm-hmm. And then when you see somebody dressing as them, you understand, oh, they got it. They can relate.
Hey, Adam, please tell everyone where they can go to find out more about you and find out more about Evertaster.
Oh, well, I suggest that you head over to your local bookstore, Barnes & Noble. If you can either find it on the shelf or request a copy. You can also go to Amazon.com or to other indie bookstores where you can find a copy. You can also go to Evertaster.com just to check out what I'm doing lately, or FutureHousePublishing.com. Follow me on Instagram at Adam Glendon Sidwell on Instagram, and say hello, and I will say hello right back. But those are all the places that you can get a copy of those books.
We've had a great time speaking to the author and driving force behind the Evertaster series, Adam Sidwell. Adam, thanks so much for being on the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
My pleasure. My pleasure. You have an awesome day.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Abrianna Johnson. She'll be here to celebrate equestrian life and her wonderful picture book, Cowgirl Cameron. That's the next episode of the podcast. If you're the author of a great children's book, we would love to have you as a guest on the show. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy. It gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic book, and it does not cost a thing. No need to pay anybody to facilitate a visit. All you need to do is to go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the author's Click Here button at the top of the page. Scroll on down to where it says, be a guest. We want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Adam Sidwell. Be sure to check out Evertaster. Also want to thank my team, Alejandro Doherty, Fatima Khan, Justina Thompson, Helen Frazier. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.